Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It's lovely to see people in real life again. Welcome to this kickoff event of the Summer Schools for Alternative Economic Monetary Systems and Green Building Solutions. My name is Nora Laufer. I'm an economic journalist at the Austrian daily newspaper Der Standard. I have the pleasure to guide you through this afternoon and evening today. I was just saying it was lovely to see real faces. Actually, a year ago I said the same thing, I think. It was half a year into the pandemic. Now it's 1.5 years. But still, it's nice again to see so many faces here. Also, hello to those who join us online, who are at home right now. But today we're not going to talk about the COVID crisis. We're going to talk about the climate crisis. As the topic is today, climate change, is there a new dynamic? Before we start with the program, I'll give you a short briefing what we're going to listen to today. You can also see it here on the slides. So we'll start off with some introductory and welcoming words. At 5:30, we'll hear 3 speeches. Then we'll see a video of all the participants from the summer universities. And afterwards, there will be half an hour break. For those who are here, they can have coffee and cake. But for those who are not here with us today, but at home, they'll also have a possibility to talk to each other. I will explain that later. And after the pause, there will be a panel discussion for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. And today we have an all-female panel, which I personally think is quite nice, as there's normally so many all-male panels, but that's only my opinion. Yes. Enough from my side. Now I'd like to welcome, first of all, Andrea Mautz-Leopold. She's member of the Viennese Landtag and the Municipal Council.
Thank you very much. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all on behalf of the Mayor and Vice Mayor of the city of Vienna. The buildings of the Technical University are impressive, as are many areas and buildings in this beautiful city. Vienna is a city with a long history, a city that is constantly evolving, a city that has an exceptionally fast public transport network, and that this quickly connects densely populated areas with recreational areas and places of work. 53% of the area of Vienna is green space. We find many historical buildings here, especially in the center of the city. And in Vienna, we find the so-called Altbau, as well as the allotment gardens, municipal housing, and very modern living and working concepts, and new urban development areas. Incidentally, we are the only city in Europe where over 60% of the people live in subsidized, i.e. social housing. Vienna has a lot to offer. Students online as well. Vienna is definitely worth a stay. In addition to your summer university, I hope you will also find time to go for a walk in Vienna and to discover the halls of Vienna in the shortest possible time, by subway. You will deal with what is currently the most important topic of our time, and that makes me very happy, because it's precisely people like you who will shape our future, who will find new solutions to complex challenges. Green building solutions. Yes, we need modern and courageous concepts for our cities and metropolitan areas. And yes, we need economics with social and ecological values. Yes, climate change is omnipresent, and we need a new dynamic. I'm very pleased that I can be here today, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to you again on behalf of the city of Vienna. I wish you an eventful, instructive, and educational time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I would kindly ask Anna-Andrea Steiger. She's the Vice Rector of the TU Wien.
Thank you, Nora. Dear honored guests, dear colleagues, and especially dear students from all over the world, welcome to our historical Kuppelsaal of our main building of the Technische Universität Wien. It is really a big pleasure and a special occasion for me to stand here, live, welcoming you to the Summer University. Austria's universities had their doors open for research and teaching, even during the pandemic and lockdowns. But let me tell you, it was quite the challenge. The past few months in COVID mode have brought fundamental changes in our living and working environment. And yes, of course, we were digitized before the pandemic. And for many of our employees, working from home was nothing new. And most of our students are digital natives. Much of the studies and jobs tasks could be done via distance learning and teaching in a home office. But it was often difficult to continue working on projects or to teach, especially in our laboratories. Our 5,400 employees and 26 students did a remarkable job changing their working ways so fundamentally. In the last year, topics such as climate catastrophes, climate change, and economic crisis have taken a backseat. Right now, however, they are more important than ever. At TU Wien, our so-called TU Green Team consists of students and staff from all faculties and departments dedicated to creating a more sustainable university. The aim of the TU Green Team is to develop visible change for a more sustainable work life. Every month in their meetings, the focus is on environmental topics such as transport, waste reduction, recycling and upcycling, composting, energy and water conservation, and pollution prevention. This is communicated and promoted via monthly posters and organized events and activities. In addition, long-term changes are promoted and implemented, such as waste separation and recycling. The goal of this team is to raise awareness for these crucial topics and offer methods and policies to improve the situation. This summer university has a long tradition, starting as the Green Summer Academy for the 4 TU University network. These are the universities from Vienna, Budapest, Prague, and Bratislava. Created and organized on behalf of my former colleague, Vice Rector for International Issues, Mr. Kaiser, who was also president of the ÖAD for many years. Professor Stieldorf was there from the start. That's why TU Wien is co-founders of the summer school, which was then anchored at Boku. Unfortunately, Professor Stieldorf, who created the basic structure of the summer university and who was partner from the start on, cannot be here today. She sends us warm regards and greetings. This year's Summer University's Alternative Economic and Monetary Systems and Green Building Solution focus on the interdisciplinary teaching of alternatives to the economic status quo and in particular on the relevance of these for the climate change problem. A special focus will also be placed on solutions to the financial crisis triggered by COVID-19. The Summer University Green Building Solution will discuss topics such as passive house construction, energy efficiency, and sustainable urban planning. The students will take part on inspiring talks about sustainable architecture, ecological building alternatives, passive house technologies. They will have the opportunity to visit virtual tours demonstrating Vienna's best practices in low-energy houses. And they will do study project works in international groups with dedicated tutorship. I wish you all fruitful discussions, have a good time, and let us cultivate a confident outlook on the future.
Thank you very much. So it's an all-female panel, but we have one male speaker today in terms of gender diversity. Welcome, Günther Jedlicka. He's the CEO of ÖAD Student Housing.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. It's a great pleasure that you are all here. Well, let's talk about, I've split my presentation in 3 units. It's about reading books, what else? ÖAD student housing, and then I will focus on the ÖAD summer universities. Well, these were 2 books which impressed me enormously. One is Die Grenzen des Wachstums, Limits to Growth, a very famous book written in 1972, and the other one, Factor 4 by Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker. In this book I heard the first time about the passive house. Was a lot about wind energy, photovoltaic, and this book is one reason why we are here at the moment. Well, there are 2 other books which I also can heavily recommend. One is Haben oder Sein, To Have or To Be by Erich Fromm. It shows perfectly well where we are right now. If we would be in a status of more being than more having, then we wouldn't have the problems right now. And the other one is Man's Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl, an Austrian who survived the concentration camp. Well, last but not least, 3 books which influenced me enormously regarding the alternative economic and monetary system. One is called Das Geld-Syndrom by Helmut Kreuz. It's a fantastic book. I, for myself, study economics, but I've learned a lot in reading that book at the beginning of 2000. And it's about compound interest and all these problems which occur about the interest problematic. The other one is by Christian Felber, Gemeinwohlökonomie, Creating an Economy for the Common Good, or Change Everything, how it is called in English. And Christian Felber will also join us at the summer university. And, well, also a fantastic book, which I can really recommend. And last but not least, a book called Vollgeld, or in English it's called Positive Money or Sovereign Money. And this will be a big topic at our summer university. I will go in detail that a little bit later. Well, now I will come to our organization. It's ÖAD Student Housing. Here you see tiny Austria with all the university locations where we are. Well, we are a 100% subsidiary of the ÖAD. It's the Austrian Service Center for European and International Mobility. The most important program, I think you will know it, is the Erasmus program. And what is very important also for us is we are a non-profit company. Well, some facts and figures. Normally we accommodate around 10,000 international and also some Austrian students per year. 3/4 of that, also 7,500 in Vienna. We have built in the last 20 years 13 dorms, 13 ÖAD guest houses, and 8 dorms are built in passive house construction, and all are with solar energy and photovoltaic. Well, here you see, well, I was so impressed by the book Factor 4, I've mentioned that before, about passive house, and this was built in 2005. It was in the world the first student dorm in passive house construction. We are still very happy with that house. It's very close to the University of Economics in the 2nd district. Another very interesting and fantastic project finished 5 years ago. It was for the Montan University in Leoben. It's nearly completely in wooden construction. It's also a passive house with photovoltaic on top. And yeah, we are also very happy with this house. Here you see how it looks inside. It's the entrance. You see it looks more than a hotel, than a student dorm maybe. Yeah, we're really happy with that house and the students also. Yeah, why these 2 summer universities? I'm also very interested in philosophy, and I like this saying very much by Victor Hugo. There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And we think that these 2 summer universities are very essential in that field. Well, there are two things. There are the problems and the solutions. we want to say something about the problems, but in fact we are concentrating on the solutions. Also a very nice saying by Henry Ford at the beginning of the 20th century, it's well enough that people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. I think it's still true, and I think it hasn't changed a lot, and I'm sure that students taking part at our summer university will understand it afterwards. I don't know if they will start the revolution, but we'll see. Yeah, then I've mentioned that before, Vollgeld, sovereign money, positive money will be a big topic at our summer university. Just to give you a few words about that, the advantages of sovereign money or positive money, there would be no longer no problem with interest and compound interest. The economy no longer has to grow. Money creation only by the national bank. Currently 90% of money creation is by private banks. And money at your bank account is 100% secure. And last but not least, all the countries could reduce their debts by approximately 2/3 without saving anything. Sounds strange, but it would work. Well, Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister in the UK at the beginning of the 80s, there was a saying by her, there is no alternative, and we changed that to there is no alternative for alternatives. I think this game is also, knows nearly everyone. In German it's called DKT, das kaufmännische Talent. In English it's called Monopoly. And at the end, you will know it if you have played it, there is only normally one winner. The winner takes it all, like the ABBA song is. And I played it when I was a child, I played it with my children, and now I understand how our economy works in the same way as the game Monopoly. Well, and finally, I will finish with two super Swedish girls, I would say. Greta Thunberg, their first protest was at the end of August 2018, and it's unbelievable what has been done or what she did with Fridays for Future and so on. It was really, really impressive what she did, I think. And the other one is Pippi Langstrumpf, or in English Pippi Longstocking, invented by Astrid Lindgren, and she's such a courageous girl, and that's what I want to give to our students taking part at our two summer universities. Come on, start now, be courageous. Zack, zack, zack means do it right now, and be clever. Thank you very much.
So after Greta Thunberg and Pippi Longstockings, another great woman, I would kindly ask Helga Kromp-Kolb. She's a meteorologist and climate researcher, and she's the academic head of the AEMS Summer School.
Thank you. And of quite a different age group. Well, welcome everyone as well from my side. I have two hats today. One is that I represent BOKU, my university, the university that hosts, that is participant in both summer schools, but also hosts the AEMS, the Alternative Economic and Monetary Systems. The university was founded as a university for agriculture and forestry, and it has meanwhile developed into a university that covers essentially the whole spectrum of all the problems we're facing today. Obviously, we haven't helped solve them, but we're trying to. We're covering all the ecological aspects, but very closely linked with economic processes, and well, a little bit into humanities, but much more into technology. So we're also a technical university in the stricter sense of the word, but broad spectrum. And we are very much focused on more on applied research than on theoretical background. Not completely, but one of the strengths of the university, I believe, is that we're really looking at problems, analyzing the problems and trying to find solutions. And the typical problems we're facing these days are not disciplinary, they are interdisciplinary. And that makes our university very interdisciplinary, is a very interdisciplinary platform where things happen in a very, well, in a way that you really get input from very different sources. Enough of that of the university. My second hat is the hat as well, the academic head of the AEMS, the Alternative Economic and Monetary System Summer School. It was initiated by Günther. He has already told you why. And he addressed me one day and said, wouldn't this be something important? And I said, very important, because universities have the tendency to be rather conservative. It's inherent in their nature. You have professors that teach students and usually pick the brightest students to stay as their assistants, and these assistants then get into the academic career and then they become professors, and they have imbibed the thinking and the teaching of their teachers. Of course, they enlarge on that and they go beyond that, but nevertheless, there's a certain tendency to replicate the professors that are at universities, ladies and men, same. And so we sometimes need some input from the outside to make change. One of the main sources of input from the outside is our students. It's very frequently the students that keep asking, that keep demanding, that keep saying, well, what about? And that's very important. And it's really one of the roles they are not fully aware of, but I think it's a very important role. At the Agricultural University Boku, for instance, it was the students that demanded that we do not only look at classical agriculture or industrial agriculture, I would call it, but also at biological agriculture. Meanwhile, it's established, no problem, but it was students that really gave the incentive. And I think that's good, but sometimes incentives also come from the outside, and I think the economy and the financial systems are one of the areas that are not very much or have not been discussed for a very long time. Financial system still is not discussed so much, it's not publicly. The economic system has become more, the discussion has become more open and there's more pressure behind it, also from students at the economic universities. But if you also look, for instance, at Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that the United Nations has agreed upon, all the nations of the world have agreed upon, if you look at them, you will not find one Sustainable Development Goal on finances, for instance. You will not find one on economy, a little bit in SDG 8. And of course, all of it is inherent in all the other SDGs, but it's not explicitly addressed. There are no targets that are valid for these very central topics. And I think that has a reason, and the reason is that it's such a sensitive topic, that there's so much attached to it. Ideologies as well as practical consequences in everyday life. Nevertheless, I think these two topics have to be discussed. They have to be also open for reforms, for changes, maybe for revolutions, who knows. But in order to do that, we need to know something about them. And that means from a scientific point of view, we need to study them. We need to study not only what we have, but also what has been in the past. People think that was always that way. It's not true. The system we are in now, or the systems we are in now, are comparatively young. We're talking about a few decades, not more. So we have to also to look at the past and see, well, what worked before, and why wouldn't it work now, or would it work now, or what can we take from the past, but also look into the future and what has changed and what change is now necessary. And I think big changes are necessary, and I think that is what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. There's 17 goals, but essentially what they are saying is that we need to find a way to live that is compatible with the planetary boundaries, with what our planet can supply, and at the same time make sure that people have a good life, and not only people here, but people everywhere in the world, and also coming generations. So it's an ecological and it's a social topic that is really encased in these Sustainable Development Goals. Now you might ask, well, where's the economy? Well, that's just it. The economy is really a tool. It's a tool to make the other two things possible. And if you just think of what we're sort of hearing all the time, it's sort of the economy is the central thing. We have to keep the economy going. We have to keep the economy growing in order to be able to live within the planetary boundaries, in order to supply a good life for everyone. But if this economy is destroying the planet, then somehow it doesn't work out. And this is the difficulty we're in, and this is why it's so important that we really discuss these things. And as I told the students, we met the students just this afternoon of our summer school, as I told them, we will not supply them with the solution to all the problems. What we can show them is that there's different ways of thinking, that there's different approaches, and that they have to work in order to find what approach is suitable for them, what approach do they think is reasonable, and then keep discussing it, and of course in the end also change society in order to meet with the visions that the SDGs, for instance, propose, and maybe even go beyond that. So that is the reason for the summer school, and we have 50 students this year from 26 nations, which is great, because we need the diversity. We need people from different backgrounds telling us, well, that sounds good to you, but to me this means, and be careful, and so on. So I think that's really important to have this diversity, and we're very happy to have it. We have the 8th summer school this year, and there were no 2 summer schools that were the same. We have been continuously trying to improve. We have been learning from students from one year and trying to make things better in the next year. And we have the huge problem that there's so many topics that should be addressed, and that we can't fit them all in those 3 weeks. So we're always missing out on something. But nevertheless, I think what's left is still very important and very valid. And the feedback we get from students is encouraging us to keep going, because to be honest, at my age, I could do other things in summer, especially if it's hot as it is in Vienna these days. So, but it's really encouraging, the feedback we get, so it keeps us going. And I hope, maybe not I myself, but others will take over, and we can offer this until the universities do that job, and teach what needs to be taught throughout all the universities, because economy is relevant for all universities. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this day being rather close. Thank you for your attention.
So until this days close, and we'll hear at all the universities in Austria and elsewhere about the climate crisis and about alternative economic systems. Today we'll get 3 inputs, again from 3 women. So you were talking before about students that need to ask questions, students that need to demand, and I think one of those students is here with us today because she is not only a student at TU Vienna, but she's also an environmental activist with Fridays for Future Austria. Anika Dafert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. I did not include a presentation because I think you all know what Fridays for Future looks like. the demonstrations, the pictures of Greta Thunberg, and so on. So my name is Anika Dafert. I'm 19 years old, and I've been striking with Fridays for Future for 129 weeks now. I'm a student at TU Vienna, and together with my family, I founded Fridays for Future in Salzburg in February of 2019. Since then, I have been at 2 climate conferences. I've met politicians, heads of companies, heads of states, scientists, activists. The climate crisis concerns us young people. Sometimes it feels like today's politicians would hand over a broken present to the young generation, saying, yeah, we knew it was broken, but it was too late to get it fixed. But right now, we see it every day how the climate crisis kills people. Even in Austria, people just die because of the weather gets hotter in summer. Not only old people, but people with cardiovascular diseases, people with neurological diseases. Floodings in Germany and Austria, heat waves in Canada, fires in Greece. It will become worse and worse in the future. That is why Fridays for Future emerged. Owing to the IPCC report, which was published in 2018, one talked about the real consequences of the climate crisis for the first time. Before that, even I was just aware of a climate change. But, like many people, I thought that if it really was that bad, politics would take care of it. And it turns out every day just how wrong I was. And so we striked, and we still do. Not only for more climate action, not at all for ecofascism, but for climate justice. Because there never will be real climate action without justice, social, racial, gender justice. After all, what good is an intact planet if the people who live on it cannot live well? The last few days, I lived my life just like another 19-year-old. I've been working, not really reading the news, enjoying my summer holidays. I haven't really been talking about politics. And with every day, the climate crisis just sort of creeped out of my head. Sometimes I'd be surprised about how little time it takes that I just forget about the climate crisis and all the catastrophes going on in the world. And the more I think about it, the more I know that I cannot blame myself for this. Last Thursday, reality hit me again. It hit me hard. With all the floodings going on, the climate crisis made its way back into my mind again. But why does something catastrophic have to happen for people to notice the state of the world? People are good at putting things to the back of their minds, or at least the things that don't concern them directly. We've all seen dozens of documentaries about overfishing, about starving people in the global south. But do we really care about it a few hours, a few days later? And why do we not? Because we often don't know what to do about it. When I was in school, I learned a bit about politics. I've learned that we live in a democracy, that means that the people rules. I've learned that you can protest, that you can sign a referendum, that you can vote. But when I decided that I wanted to school strike, I didn't have a clue on how to even register a demonstration. To boot, I haven't even been on a protest in my entire life. And before I listened to Greta Thunberg's speeches, I didn't even really know a whole lot about the Paris Agreement, because according to my geography book, the latest agreement was the Kyoto Protocol. I learned about the greenhouse effect in school. I knew about the dying polar bears. I didn't know that people were already dying because of the climate crisis. And I didn't know what will happen in the future if we don't lower emissions now. If I think about it, I actually wouldn't have to know all this if politicians would simply do their jobs. But since they're not, we need to at least educate people on what's going on and what ought to be done about it. We need to empower people. We need to empower students. And we can only do that by teaching them how to use their voices, how to be a part of a democracy. Do you know that school law actually says that students should be taught how to be an active part of society? If we want people to participate in politics, we need to give them the tools. Teach them about historic protests, about how people change the world by striking, by protesting, about society has been influenced by dissatisfied people. And we need to teach them, of course, about the climate crisis, about the hard scientific facts and the societal backgrounds. But if you're not coincidentally the Minister of Education, you cannot easily change this. Nevertheless, everyone can be a part of the change. Not everyone can be a politician and have the responsibility and reach of a minister, for example. But just like everyone has a role to play in society, there's a place for everyone in the fight against the climate crisis. Whether you protest with us on the streets, donate to organizations, talk to people about it and educate them, or just be aware of the state the world is in, it all makes a difference. I always like to quote Greta Thunberg. She said, "No one's too small to make a difference." And she's right. Greta, a then 15-year-old student, started striking and accidentally sparked a global movement. Not all of us have to be Greta Thunbergs, but we all can be a small, or rather big, piece in the puzzle, depending on our resources, on your reach, on our work. You can be part of the change. My plea to each and every one of you is to find your place. Find the way that you, as a person, can help to demand climate justice, because we only can do that all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anika. I think there are those students demanding, and I think it's great. Now again, I kindly ask you, Helga Kromp-Kolb, on the floor again for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can just add a little story that I heard recently to the last speaker, which I think is sort of very, very nice. There was a big forest fire, and all the animals fled from the forest. And the animals then saw a small bird flying to a watering place, taking its beak full of water, flying over the forest and dropping the water, flying back and forth and putting water on that fire. And they said, well, you can't expect to extinguish that fire with that little water you're transporting. And the little bird said, I know, but I want to do my part. I want to do my share. And I think that's what is really demanded of all of us. Okay, climate change is a new dynamic. I must admit that I was responsible or co-responsible for that title. And when we devised the title, I only thought of climate politics. But when I started preparing this talk, I figured out I'm a climatologist, really. So the question is there a new dynamic in climate change itself, not in policy? And I want to show you this graph. I hope it works, yeah. You can see a circle showing the temperature increase compared to 1850 to 2020. And you can see it moves outward, and it moves especially strongly outwards over the last 3 decades, really. So there is a dynamic in climate change. I think we can risk looking at it again. You can see it's in the beginning, it sort of stays stuck in the same area, and then starting about 1970, it really starts to move outward. Now you can see it will develop very fast. And if we look at this in a more quiet way and a more scientific way, looking at the temperature development since 1880, so it's about the same period as we saw in this animation, we can see that since about 1970 we have this temperature increase, but especially the last 6 years have been much warmer than expected. Now, it's a bit too early to say whether this is really an indicator for a more dramatic change now or not, but at least the last 6 years were a dramatic change. Whereas until then we had a temperature increase of about 1.1 degrees, we're now at 1.2 degrees on the global average. So there's quite some development in this. And if we look at what has been happening over the last weeks, but you can go the last few years, there's been all sorts of extreme events, and just adapting to climate change is no longer an option. If you saw those pictures, it's quite obvious to you that there is no way that we can build our cities and towns, or that we can protect our forests from these natural disasters that are triggered by climate change. And the graph on the right-hand side shows an analysis of heat death in cities. Every cross is sort of one city, and the temperature, average daily temperature and average daily relative humidity at which this death occurred. And everything that is on the right of the blue line is sort of, this is a line beyond which deaths do occur, heat deaths do occur. Also in the general population, not just in those predisposed toward it. And everything to the right of the red line is that the likelihood of heat death occurring is above 95%. So it's extremely likely that heat death will occur. And if you just look at the numbers, we're not far from that. For instance, if you look at those 40 degrees, for 40 degrees daily average, you only need about 22% of humidity. That's not much. You easily have that. You usually have more. And that means with higher humidity, lower temperatures already can cause death. So it's really moving very close to us. Climate change is moving very close to us. And I want to show one aspect that is often overlooked and not talked about very much. That is that climate change impacts are typically underestimated by the scientific community. Not that they're not aware of it, but they tend to report on the more likely developments and not on the extreme developments. In this case, it's just sea level change, and you can see the gray part is the IPCC projections that were made in the year 1990. And the blue and red line is what really happened. So what really happened is at the very top of what the scientists published at that time, that it could occur. This is systematic, and it's also inherent in the way science is organized. And this is shown quite well by this graph. On the left-hand side, you have on the horizontal axis, you have the climate sensitivity, which means how much warmer, how much is global warming that is expected. It's 1.5, 3, 4.5 degrees, and so on. And the curve shows the likelihood. So the most likely future temperature in this graph, and it's just illustrative, is that we will be somewhere around 3 degrees. And you probably know that if all the all the measures are taken that governments have now pledged to do, then we're headed for something like 3 degrees, maybe a bit more than 3 degrees. And I'm sure you're all aware that where we should be heading is 1.5 degrees. But that is not the main issue here. The main issue is that these are the most likely temperature increases from the scientific point of view. But of course, there's also models that show that under the same circumstances, we might reach 6 or 7.5 degrees warming. And that is the light blue shaded area. Now, if we look at the impacts that go along with that climate sensitivity, we can see that this is an exponential curve. So the dark blue, what we are discussing in science and what media are reporting, we're looking at rather low impacts. And the temperature, the extremes of the sensitivity have much, much higher impact. So this is not a linear relationship. It's a logarithmic. It's a logarithmic curve. And if you add likelihood, not add, but multiply likelihood and impact, then you get risk. And again, you can see the dark blue area is the risks we are talking about. But the really high risks are in the light blue area, and we hardly talk about them. So, yes, what we saw these days is high impact. And the question is, are we somewhere already nearing those impacts that we do not typically discuss, or are they even much, much worse? And I think this is something to keep in mind, that what we're discussing, what science, what the IPCC reports bring and so on, that is rather likely, whereas we can also look at more extremes. And yes, and I think that is one of the reasons, now you have the picture of the Fridays for Future, that is one of the reasons why youth is on the roads and why it is good that they're on the streets and why we need not only young people, but we need everyone on the street, everyone asking for change. So climate system itself is developing. It has a new dynamic, and we don't quite know whether we have a full grasp of that dynamic. Now, how is dynamics in the climate policy? Now, the history is rather, took a long time, didn't it? 1997, we had the first climate conference, global climate conference. About 10 years later, the IPCC was founded. Another 5 or 4 years later, we had the Rio Climate Change Framework Convention, and it took time and time and time. And I would like to show you a little animation, a Swedish animation that I think, Swedish or Norwegian, I don't quite know, come to think of it, that I think represents that quite well. So that was where we were before Paris. And then Paris happened, well, in between, emissions rose and rose and rose. And then we had Paris, 2015. And it was a breakthrough. It really was a breakthrough, because at last the world had decided on what goal they were attempting to reach. However, It is now 2021, and emissions are still rising. So is there really a new dynamic? I think you can find indications of a new dynamic. The US went out of the Paris Agreement, is back into the Paris Agreement. There was a climate summit of world leaders. China wants to peak in 2030 and be neutral by 2060. The European Union has enhanced its climate goals and has recently presented its action plan, Fit for 55. The pledges are becoming more and more ambitious, and that's something good. Question is, will the actions follow? If we look at the economy, international players are pledging, more and more of them. They're forming consortia, they're forming groups to help to meet the Paris goals. What I think is even more encouraging is that two big fossil fuel companies, Chevron and ExxonMobil, were pushed by their own shareholders to reduce their emissions. I think that is a real sign of, well, something is going on. There is some new dynamic. There's, of course, a lot more to say about this, but let's go on to the legal world. The German Constitutional Court made a really important ruling recently. What they said is that the goals the German government had set for itself, or for Germany, for 2050, 2040, were not sufficient. There were not sufficient actions taken until 2030, because if no actions were taken in the next 10 years, then the actions that would be necessary starting 2030 would strongly endanger the freedom of the people that live afterwards. So it is a question of justice on the one hand, but also of people being able to live their self-determined lives. If we don't act soon, the future generations will not have much chance to do that. And that is a court ruling, and by the way, it had immediate effect. The government, within, I think, 1 week, raised its aims, its goals. Still, the actions are not there, but we have to be thankful for steps in the right direction. Shell in the Netherlands was sentenced to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, and not just as a company in their own activities, but Scope 3. So the whole chain has to reduce emissions within 10 years by 45%, which is quite ambitious. There's lawsuits on being fought in the US, in Portugal, and those in Portugal, for instance, also affect us here in Austria. So the legal world is becoming a playground for climate, and which I think is very important, because this is sort of one way of getting more action from our governments. The scientific and the public debate have changed. Scientific communications have become much clearer and more tangible. If you read the last IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, it is much clearer. You can understand what is behind all those phrases than the ones before. Climate issues are in the headlines, and interest and concern have survived even the corona crisis. Yes, there was more on the corona crisis than on the climate crisis, but as has been shown, people have understood that the climate crisis is the much more dangerous issue than the corona crisis was, and that it will not go away by itself, and we need to act upon it. So there are signs of hope, and the corona crisis also, the corona crisis also offers a chance. I don't know how many people noticed it, but practically in all countries, ideologies and dogmas were thrown overboard without comment within days. For years, we had been hearing the economy goes first, and after that, all the other things, because economy is what makes everything else possible. And suddenly, from one day to the next, it was health is first, and economy doesn't really matter. We need to save lives. So that was quite a change, and nobody really commented on it. But it shows that change is possible. Now, I don't think we need to go into a corona modus, and I don't think it would be good to go into corona mode to solve the climate crisis. We need a much more reflected and a strategy with a long-term view, but we have had much more time to prepare for it. We have all the things, all the components we need to get started, they're available. The other aspect is that the economy in many countries is now down and needs governmental support, and it has the chance to reinvent itself. Why should they all build back what they had before? Why shouldn't they now use this opportunity to build something different? A house that is destroyed by an earthquake, and where you already wanted to change the heating system, where you wanted to change where the windows are, where the entrance is, you wouldn't build it up in the same way and then do all the other changes. You will change it as you rebuild it, and that is one hope that we could have, that Corona might help us do. And the state has more power to enhance, to get these changes done, because their money and their support is needed. And a lot of people have reconsidered their priorities, and a lot of companies have reconsidered their priorities. So we are in a mode of change. So that is also one issue of hope. So in conclusion, climate change itself has moved, I believe, into a new phase, and not a pleasant one. It's speeding up. The political constellation is more hopeful for action than it has been for a long period. A new dynamic can be felt. I truly believe a new dynamic can be felt, and Fridays for Future is largely responsible for that. However, we must be aware that this also triggers more opposition, and the opposition is becoming louder, more organized. Much more engagement and effort will be needed in order to win this war for the survival of civilization, and I think it is no less than that. And I would like to close with a thought by Roberto Unger, who said, in every sphere, private, business, national, and international, the greatest obstacle to transforming the world is our inability to imagine that it could be otherwise. And I think that is one of the things the summer schools try to teach, that we can think, that we can imagine that things could be otherwise, in economy, in finance, but also in buildings. Thank you very much.
I think different spheres is actually quite a good introductory word, or two words for the next speaker, because the climate crisis is not going to tackle only one field of expertise. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to be a problem to solve in a lot of different fields. Our next speaker, Gabu Heindl, she's an architect and civil engineer, and she will talk about how climate crisis is also affecting architecture and vice versa.
Okay, but ich schieb's dir noch rüber.
Just a second.
Until the presentation is here, I will tell you a bit about how it's going on afterwards. So after the third presentation, we'll see a video from the students of the summer schools. And before the coffee break, I would also want to invite you to look at the posters in the back. I'll talk about it later. And I think now we're good to go.
Yep. Thank you very much for this invitation, and it's great to hear that so many people will be continuously working, and of course will not maybe find all the solutions within the summer school, but I think we need as you said, we need every corner, every minute, every week to do so. I'm happy to contribute from my profession. I'm an architect and urban planner, but also activist, and I've been working for a long time in actually trying to do exactly what has just been said, try to imagine a different world or a different idea, try to imagine paradigm changes, but also by understanding what the conditions are. So I'm just going to run you briefly. This is more publications that I wanted to bring in that we looked into. The Dritte Baukultur report is a report from architecture and planning, what is happening in Austria. In this case, I've been doing a report and study on land politics and land politics instruments. I'm very happy to be part, lead author when it comes to housing for this new Climate Change Center Austria APCC special report coming up. And I've recently published my book, which I'm happy if anybody wants a copy. It's in German. It's called City Conflicts, and it's actually on radical democracy in architecture and urban planning, which relates, I believe, very much to the climate issue that we're talking about. But in order to get us into the topic, I want to send you postcards, or I'm not sending postcards, but this is, for instance, the Austrian Architectural Association which did these postcards. This is greetings from Austria, from Vorarlberg, and it shows how highly sealed and many, many one-family houses we can see in this area. And I spared myself and yourself to bring greetings from Germany or from Hallein, but we can imagine. We know, and it's been all over the news, that 14 hectares a day are being actually built, half of it being for parking and streets, etc. We can have greetings from Styria, because in Styria at this moment, basically this is really how we have to imagine going west. This is real searching for gold by buying up very cheap land and then asking places there, asking village governments to actually bring up photovoltaic on all these different beautiful Styrian hills. And we are going to face a discussion, if we can face it, because the problem is that can we democratically face it if we actually want to keep some of the landscape, or who is to earn the profit from the sun? And this is, of course, comes along with our dilemma that we need to have kind of the sun producing energy. So this is literally going on right now. We can have greetings from the south, as we all know. Why do we, will we expect, and certainly will hopefully welcome any migrants from anywhere where actually it's capitalism and it's our system, it's our lifestyle drying up the land. We can send ourselves greetings from Romania, where all the woods are basically torn down for, I could give you 3, 4, 5 names of Austrian wood companies, which I've had 2 students from Romania last year. They are so angry at the Austrians because actually we are celebrating wooden constructions here while forests are being burned down or cut down or actually kind of taken out of Romania and left over disasters. But we could also greet ourselves just from around the corner, from Donaustadt, and we could say hello from Asphalt City. And of course, asphalt is, when it comes at the end, it is an economical issue. It's still the cheapest material, it's easy to maintain. And the question, of course, is who is to maintain? We could just get greetings from people living in luxury apartments in towers, who coincidentally get cooled down by the water of the Donaukanal, which of course, if we do that too many times, we wonder what happens to Donaukanal. So the question is, who gets to cool the houses from our water? Is it Raiffeisen, which is cooling 28%, or is it the triple towers? Or we could have greetings from the past. And this is where I try to change the color of the postcard, because I believe we can also learn something else, or like maybe this is yet not a greeting from the past, but maybe from the past and future. This is an installation we did at Nordbahnhof when studying that the ÖBB, which is the Austrian rail company, actually supposedly a public institution, sells this ground for highest private market prices and makes it exactly the reason why there is hardly any affordable housing going to happen in this place. So what we need to do is basically look at who sells our land, who takes our water, and okay, I don't want to even say our, because we need to actually say who is we, who are us, so to say. It's a real global issue. So this is why we actually claimed 100% ÖBB, öffentlich bebaubarer Boden, öffentlicher Boden. We need to claim that. Yeah? But we can learn from the past, because claiming was a very good exercise that actually Red Vienna was really good in. How can we effectively engage people with what politicians could be doing? If you walk through Vienna, you can find this in many, many places, which are basically 64,000 workers' housing units have been built during what is called Red Vienna, which is the area at the time between 1919 and 1933. And in all of these houses, you find such big red letters, and I will translate them to you into English. It says, built by the city of Vienna in the years so-and-so, by the means of the housing tax. The housing tax was a highly progressive redistribution tax, which taxed the luxury of having much space, having much housing space, and redistributed to those who didn't have, and building houses. Now, can you imagine a government that today invents a tax like this, and then puts it proudly on the facades, which they just maybe didn't build, but renovate or change, because we're not to build new, but basically just reuse? Can you imagine that? Let's hope. Let's imagine it. Let's work for this government. And this is what makes me sometimes work on such collages. This is one, imagining that this government is there. And I will read it, also translated into English. It says city house, so it's maybe not anymore Gemeindebau. It says made possible. Maybe it's not anymore built by the city. It could also be made possible by the city of Vienna in the future years, by the means of heritage tax, of wealth tax. Let's discuss it, of CO2 tax. Let's discuss what tax do we want to have on the houses that we want to be built for those who have no house. Or, and this is a greeting from me to Berlin, saying, okay, well, maybe there's houses that will be expropriated in the future and greened, maybe expropriated from Deutsche Wohnen AG, greened. And then, again, what's the tax that we're using that? Because actually to expropriate these housing units that have been expropriated needs much money, as we know. Yeah? A lot of money actually to buy back those houses that have been privatized. So, enough of greetings. This is why I propose, and it's not me proposing that, but I'm kind of picking that up, to think solidarity as really something that relates what has been said, the social and the climate question together. And we could oppose it to scarcity or the scarcity, which we see much more often. The scarcity is the city, and when I say city, it doesn't only need to be Vienna, it could be a smaller city as well, of course. But it's the city of financialization, which we see clearly today. There's no piece of land or housing at this moment that is not useful for speculation in our area. It's a city of scarcity, of austerity, etc. It's a privatization of commons. We've just seen it. Even the Donaukanal water is being privatized. It's the segregation of wealth. It's those wealthy living higher up, usually, even that kind of, usually, like let's say in Vienna, we are still more balanced than other cities. And it comes along with discrimination and law and order, because like this wealth also wants to be protected. So if we kind of oppose scarcity or scarcity, and we would go for solidarity or solidarity, then we could ask, for instance, just to pick up one little moment, to ask, who makes profit with the sun in the future? And for whom does the sun mean heat and burden? For whom does the sun mean I nearly die? Or for whom does it mean I don't know how to deal with it in the city? And for whom will it be the future profit? And in order not to kind of allow this to happen, or to actually think it differently, let's think the soul in solidarity, and think solidarity and the sun or the soul for all. Yeah? And that, I already said it, kind of social and climate questions combined. We need paradigm changes. I think you will discuss a lot post-growth. You will hopefully discuss justice in redistribution. I would like to discuss really pragmatically something that we just, I was just in Graz working on a project which is financed by the city of Graz. It's called Grazotopia, and together with other scientists, we actually worked on a little utopia for Graz, which turned out you cannot develop a utopia for just one city and its boundaries, so it's more general concept. And this general concept is this so-called solidarity, collectivizes or socializes the roofs and all the areas where the sun hits the ground, or possibly the solar energy can actually be used. What if we think of a world where it's not those who own roofs can actually make profit from it, but the roofs, maybe just as the land, and all the kind of the air rights above the roofs would be public or would be social. The rights to use roofs, the rights to use the area where the sun hits should belong to all of us. And we need to discuss this now, because it's now happening that kind of it's being sold and used and so on. It's the same with the land. We need to rethink land. Why would it be possible to monopolize land when land is not being able to be reproduced? What source do we want to be kind of privatized, monopolized, which cannot be remade, reproduced? Land is land as much it's there, and it's even getting less if we look at the latest news. So we have the roofs, maybe collective, we have the land collective, and we have in between this, and we could call both, like along with Silvia Federici, commons. Yeah? So with the commons of the roof landscape, and the landscape includes the landscape in Styria, all these places where actually the sun hits the land. We have land, and we have the space of the commoners, and for commoning in between. It's basically the space for all of us, to make the city, to live, and there we may not actually discuss property so much. We can also regulate that. So if we look at this more clearly, then let's think of roofs to be really collective, public, for photovoltaic. Roofs could be public roof terraces. We should not give our best spaces up there to private penthouses. We could ask for the right of the public to the top. We could ask, we can say it's cultural heritage. That's very, in Graz, the roof landscape is actually cultural heritage, which is also beautiful. It's also a collective common. Or it can be green, or it can be so and so and so. Everything actually by the building law to greenify roofs, we are already at this status of saying it's the public that is demanding to have a roof green because it's important for the public. As the sun shines for everyone the same. So if the sun shines for everyone the same, we could even imagine a future where maybe there is an unconditional solar energy credit for everyone that could be low. Everybody would get a certain credit of energy from the sun, and if it gets much more that you use, it could be taxed exponentially. So they basically say, okay, everybody has the right to have a certain energy from the sun, and those who need much more should, and now we have to discuss, pay more, be limited. I mean, that again needs to be democratically debated. we can think the same with land. If we think land, it could be green. Well, let's go into detail right away. Hoppala, sorry. So green land, let's say green land, which is a park or so, is of collective use. Nice. If land is being zoned, which hopefully we are not doing too much anymore, from green to building land, which is basically done still enormously all around Austria. This is exactly what kind of the ceiling, the amount of sealed land actually is happening. But then there could be simple regulations which we already have as instruments. You could actually say, if we need to zone new land, upzone it, then we do this only temporarily. And if it's not being used, there is a preemption right, I just translated that, a preemption right of the public, be it commune, city or so, to buy this land and again then kind of make it either a park or use it democratically for whatever is best for the place. If there's new construction, we could ask for, let's say, up to 100 added value tax, 100% of added value tax. This will be a crazy political discussion. No politician will dare to ask that. But in Switzerland, in Basel, from the 70s, the city there demanded 70% of added value tax, meaning they calculated how much would a kind of development gain profit from the zoning law, from the change of zoning, and asked for 70% back to be used for parks, public space, etc. The idea was, why it was successful is that they said, we are not taking it away from somebody, we're not taking 70% away from those who actually gain profit, but we're only giving them 30% for free. We have to change the rhetorics. Yeah? We have to really clearly see what's happening there, who gains by what. If it's existing buildings, we could ask logically for a vacancy tax. Vacancy is the most egocentric behavior that you could have. To keep space empty because it costs you nothing is only because society doesn't calculate what it costs to have vacancy. Vacancy means that all the infrastructure runs around a vacant apartment, house. The city works all around it in order just for somebody to say, I can afford it, I leave it empty. So vacancy tax or possibilities to actually ask for these places. Barcelona is doing this. It's quasi-expropriating apartments at this moment that banks have just left empty. And it has all the rights and rules for that. So would we. You could have enclosure tax. If you don't use land, tax if somebody puts a fence all around or disallow the fence. Make it usable. And again, preemptive rights. Make sure that preemption rights, make sure that it's being re-socialized. And if somebody, which happened quite sometimes in Vienna recently, now a law change has slightly changed that, but if somebody is consciously deteriorating a house in order to demolish it and in order to build something new, we could have a very simple law. If you do that, a house goes down, the land rezones back to green. Nobody would actually deteriorate a house, but it would be just logical. It's out, it's down, it's green again. We can think differently, we can demand that, we can actually invent such tools. Okay, enough of such technicalities. If we come to this space, roof, land, in between, we could discuss many things, and I'm speaking here as an architect. That's why I'm speaking about the human right to housing in its broadest sense. That means including a good surrounding. Everybody who has a right to housing has a right to good place all around. Yeah? Good Wohnumgebung, sagt man auf Deutsch. Also that demands extreme paradigm changes and also possibly demands development without growth. And I'm just showing you one graph because we're looking at so many graphs when it comes to climate. So we also developed one just to start us thinking. If we would think that the human right to housing would be an unconditional right for everyone, we could think of an unconditional private space credit for every person. Every person has the credit of, and now we should discuss, of how many square meters. And I'm not a big fan of kind of super dogmatic regulations, but it's good to think. At this moment, we're around 40 square meters per person in this country, a little higher. And we're, of course, much higher than in the South, in the global South, or in many different countries. We could ask maybe this unconditional private space credit is really for free, because it could be financed by solidarity contribution. The solidarity contribution could be opposite what is usually the profit. If we know that rent could be this high, because if it's only rent without profit, we can exactly know how much. It could be 5 square meters €5 per square meter in a house that has been built for some time. So everything that goes higher now is profit for those who own the house. If we would say there's this rent limit and there's an unconditional private space credit, so if somebody uses more space, we could actually exponentially tax the person and have this become not a profit for the owners of the place, but become a solidarity contribution to again make sure that everybody else gets their unlimited, unconditional space. Now, this is extremely, I don't know, I like such things only to make us think. We could actually think in a time where we are forced to reduce space. We're basically saying we need to reduce space, which is very true. But we need to make sure that we're not asking it of the people who are already reducing space. We have to ask it here. The question is, what do we want? Are we going to ask for a limit? I'm sometimes really looking into Immobilia pages, and I cannot believe that I'm still looking into apartments of 500 square meters, of 600 square meters. Of course, you never get the price because it must be astronomical, but just the fact that we're still looking into enormously, such a kind of difference in richness, also in land, we should discuss it. Okay, I'm coming to the very last slide. The Solidar City, as a thinking goal, is an ecological city without energy poverty. Nobody is poor because the sun shines for everyone. So we have to now discuss and debate that. It's a social city without homelessness, because land and housing are commons. They are not commodity, but we have to fight for it, and we need to actually really get this going. And it's a city of the future for all of those who are still to come. And with this, I mean for all of these or those who will come from other countries, because their living conditions are unbearable, and for all of the future generations, of course, because climate, and that's maybe the beautiful thing, it connects us intergenerationally and globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabu Heindl. Always difficult to stop someone who's full of idea and passionate about their own topics. I think we'll hear some more passionate ideas now. We'll see the video of the students of the summer school.
Bonjour tout le monde, I am Alexis. I'm French, PhD student in astronomy, and I'm living in Australia, so the classes are going to be at night, which is going to be interesting for me. So one thing I learned through my PhD studying faraway planets is that we'll never reach any, and we should take care of this one, and that's a bit of my motivation to take on this course. I'm really passionate about it and want to be more serious about it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there.
Ahlan, assalamu alaikum. This is Rahima Ismail from Algeria. I am an architect, an assistant professor at the university, and a student again at the GBS Summer University. I am very happy, very thankful, very grateful for the fact that you gave me the chance to be part of this great event that promotes green building design and green architecture. It will be a lifetime opportunity to understand this concept and try to promote it myself in my country, to be part of the global efforts that tries to save environment and ecology around the world. Thank you.
Hey, tudo bem? My name is Raul. I use pronouns he and him. I was born and raised in Brazil, where I am currently. And the reason why I decided to take this course is because I understood long ago that economics plays such an important role when facing racism. And also, if we want to talk about climate change, we cannot do that without including race, gender, and global south, communities that will be most impacted by it. So I'm really happy to be with you all for the next 3 weeks, and let's share as much knowledge as we can. Thank you. Ciao.
Marhaba. My name is Ajmal Amani. I'm living in Istanbul, Turkey. I think green building is all about people life. It's about improving quality of their life, making sustainable practices more accessible to them, and creating an equitable world to all. To learn more about green building and improving my knowledge, I'm joining Green Building Solution Summer University. Thank you.
Kusambula, I'm Dojumo. I live in capital of Bhutan, Thimphu. This AEMS course is related to my current job and it will enhance my knowledge, which will definitely help me in decision making, policy making, and legislation in my country. Thank you.
Sheda Dani. My name is Shuaib Arogundade. I'm from Nigeria, but I currently reside in the UK. I decided to participate in the GBS Summer University program because I found the modules quite interesting and I saw it as an opportunity to complement my PhD research, which is in the area of carbon reduction in construction projects. I look forward to having an exciting time during the program, as well as connect and network with amazing people like yourselves. Thank you.
Namaste. My name is Neha Shahi and I'm a conservationist from Vadodara, India. I am thrilled to join this course and learn more about environmental economics and how it plays a role in climate change and conservation policies.
Dobar dan, my name is Verina Bšaninović and I'm originally from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but right now I'm sending you my greetings from Italy because I'm here on exchange. So firstly, when I saw this program, I was so excited that I can learn something specific about sustainable architecture, which I can use in my future and apply it. So let's all together reduce our carbon footprint. Ciao!
So we've heard a lot about the climate crisis now. Also, the past week has taught us quite a lot, has showed us that it was quite a lot in the media as well. There have been the floodings, of course. There has been the EU Fit for 25 action plan by the EU Commission. But today we want to continue talking, but not only us, but we also want to include you. So there are two options. There will be microphones in here, so we will start with some initial questions, but then you can just raise your hand in here and ask a question. And you'll have the possibility to ask questions via Slido. Up there you have the link where you can find the website and the code. Since my eyes are really bad, I wrote it down here and repeat it for you. It's 885164. There you can also rank the questions of the others. And I will try to get some questions from here, but also some questions from online. Since we only have an hour left, I would kindly ask you, even though I'm sure everybody has good ideas, to keep it to short questions and not long monologues, and so we can discuss them here on the podium. Yes, and the topic, we've talked about it before, is climate change. Is there a new dynamic? And first of all, I would kindly ask the three of you for an introductory statement. So what are the biggest challenges in climate protection and mitigation? Which are the areas in which you see an improvement? I'll start right here.
Okay, solved. Technology can always be solved. Switch on. No, the biggest challenge, to keep it really short, is going to be whatever, if we go for climate justice, then it will cost some people, the fewer ones, quite something, and and they're powerful. And the challenge is to say, okay, to find a way that the many, many people that actually, and all sitting here and being on the streets and the new generations, all knowing that something has to change, but something has to change. The bad news is for some who are very powerful, very rich, have a lot, it means to, at the end, have less. And honestly, I don't think that it goes anyhow differently, and this will be the biggest challenge. But the good news is they're much less than us, than the many. Yeah? The question is how can we build alliances, maybe totally unexpected alliances. Maybe you're starting to build these here by working together globally, by working together in between generations, to really say, okay, where's going to be a dynamic to really turn this thing around.
my point is kind of related to yours. I think one of the biggest challenges is to convince the many, the people, that climate action isn't something bad, that isn't something that is going to cost them much, but that's something that's going to up the quality of life. I think many people don't realize how much the climate crisis is affecting them already, and how much the inaction of politics is affecting them, and how better their lives would be if people were actually starting to act, if politicians were actually starting to act.
Yes, I think it's not only how much the climate crisis is already affecting them, but how much the whole development has cost them, what they have lost. We sort of get used to what is, and then we don't notice what maybe our parents even had, and we don't have anymore. Like, for instance, we have noise, we don't have quiet. Our parents could stroll in the city, and we can't because it's full of cars. So we have lost a lot of things, in addition to what climate change is going to do to us or is already doing to us. And so I think there's really a lot to be gained, but I agree, the many can gain something, and there's a few who will probably not profit. However, let's stick at that for a moment, which means that what we really have to do is invent or reanimate democracy, because that is how the majority decides. But that means that the majority has to have information, has to get involved, has to participate, and all of this is part of education, part of awareness raising. So I think that is one of the central things. Looking at you, this means also we have to gain the media to support this, which I think is not hasn't fulfilled its potential yet. Media still see themselves as somebody who, an institution, that if you say something for climate justice, you also have to say something of the drawbacks, and that doesn't do justice to the situation. Or, which I know is difficult, but if you have something about what you have to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a nice article, great, and then on the side you have some marketing for flights to, I don't know, Honolulu or something. It's always a question of doing the right thing and stopping to do the wrong thing. And I think that part is more difficult than doing the right thing. That's also true for the individual, I think. Doing the right thing it's easier to do right things and continue to do the bad things. And that's where we really need to start. But I think it's a question of education, of awareness and of participation. But participation will only work if the people participating also see some results of their efforts. If that takes too long, some of the things like abolishing slavery or something, that took ages. We just don't have these ages. So I think we really need to see signs of improvement rather soon. And I think we can find them if we look for them.
I just would like to add one point. To get engaged also is easier if you're existentially secure. And this is a real, how should we say that? The cat bites its tail and so on. So to keep people financially insecure, existentially insecure, to have them in housing that you have to change every 3 years, with limited contracts, to have them nearly not make every month living, keeps people there where they cannot easily participate. So somehow we have to solve it from different angles. And that's why, and I think I really believe in what we said before, in Arbeitsteilung, in sharing the workload. We cannot wait for people who are at existential minimums and problems to engage. We have to also, and this is what Spivak so beautifully says, we have nearly lost the ability to take responsibility because somehow we don't want to speak for somebody, we don't know how to speak for, if not with, and so on. We are being kind of sensitive, etc., which is all good. But she says beautifully, we should not speak for or other, but we should also not neglect that we need to take responsibility. Those who can, those who have the luxury, also all of you, to be here, to think, to kind of have the time, to be able to be hopefully paid from the university or like to have a stipend and so on. That's pure luxury. And to use that kind of in a way, I say to a maximum, now I'm putting pressure on you. No, but to say, okay, well, others cannot do that. They don't have the means, the possibilities. And this is where we need to share workload without othering, without knowing better, so to say. And this is the difficulty, of course.
So I want to go a bit back to what you said before in your presentation, which some people might say is a bit radical, but I wouldn't say not necessary. And I want to talk about being radical. So as you said before, Helga Kromp-Kolb, about the new climate goals we have, so there's awareness, or at least the pretending to have an awareness. There's scientists who are saying that something needs to be done, but still nothing is being done. Do we need to be more radical in order to get the message where it belongs, or what is the solution? I know it's a big question, but maybe you have answers, big answers.
I wasn't radical before. I can be really much more radical, just to make that clear. And you know what? What we saw just now in Germany and in Austria, this is radical. Yeah? What is happening with climate change is radical. It's not us being radical. What we need is much more radical changes, but then because I am writing about radical democracy, it's also not the radical in terms of the chic radical, yeah? But radical in radical democracy is maybe in a very shortened and simplified version. It relates to radix. Radix being the Wurzel, being the root of things. Yeah, how can we get to the root of things, to really where the problem sits? And this means also like sometimes we are only polishing, or we are trying to kind of humanize better, but are not radically questioning, which is difficult because we cannot wait for the revolution, it's clear, but still to really always radically question. And also radical democracy is doing exactly that, is asking exactly for that, to radicalize, to democratize democracy in times when everybody tells us that there's no time for democracy, or that there's no money for it, or there is not enough people for it, yeah? And to even demand it more. Yeah? But yes, I mean, I don't think that we are radical enough at all to what is happening, to the radicality that is happening actually.
I think it's an important question, but at the same time really hard. So we at Fridays for Future discuss this quite often because, of course, there are some people who say we as Fridays for Future have to be more radical, we have to, you know, block streets and bridges and so on. But I think it's always about what people do you want to reach and how do you want to reach them? What you want them, how do you want them to react to it? So we see the reaction to, for example, Extinction Rebellion. They are doing great things, and their actions are directed to the politicians. They're not always, at least, for the greater public. So I think we at Fridays for Future might be called not really radical, but we want to mobilize everyone on the street. And I think, especially in times when now people are becoming less and less political, they're less interested in what politicians are doing, they're less democratic. I think it's important to, you know, get the people where they are, meet them where they are. So we try to really mobilize everyone, to bring them on the streets, to our strikes, not to bring them to, you know, blocking streets. but to really mobilize everyone and then, you know, work with a big movement with the masses.
Yeah, I think in the sense of more radical, yes, the sense that we have to get to the roots, and one of the reasons why we're discussing economy and monetary systems. In the other sense, do we need to shock people? Do we need to be extreme in our demands? I think that depends on who you talk to. For some persons that is necessary to get them to wake up, and for others it just means that they close their ears and they don't hear anything. So I think that's something that you just need to try to find out who reacts to what kind of information. What I think climate scientists have learned is that people are more apt to react if you promise them something better than if you threaten them with something bad. So I think it's really about a better life for most of us. I mean, you can't deny the dangers of climate change, of course not, we have to mention them. But if we stop there, then people will rather soon say, I don't want to hear this. I'd like to forget it. And as you said in your talk, we're very good at that. We're very good at pushing away thoughts we don't want. We have to, otherwise we couldn't survive. So I think that's okay, but we don't want them to do that. We want them to fight for something. And I think all the big fights were for something. It was not against some disaster, but for a better life. And I think that's where we really need to get, and I think that's how you get people to engage.
Thank you. I was thinking when you said we want to pick up the people on where they are. I disagree. I disagree in a sense because also from my own studying experience and my own teaching experience, I remember when I was studying, I was the most fulfilled when teachers would not pick me up where I was, but really challenge me or completely, I don't know, push me, my thinking, maybe too much or so, but knowing that I need to know more. Now, I'm also one person on the street, right? And I think we may nearly underestimate people if we think we need to pick them up in some projected, I don't know, sense. I'm not saying that. And I was wondering, I think blocking the street is great if blocking the street does not block the bus for people who need to go to the work or so. Can you block streets smartly? Yeah, which streets to block and which one not? This is something I was co-organizing the Donnerstagsdemonstrationen in Vienna, and this was always my part to be kind of as an architect and urbanist. I was trying to sensitize. There was a lot of work to organize this route even, and people started to hate us. But I said, okay, let's take those streets that are only kind of blocking car drivers, and not public transportation. Makes a difference. And suddenly you may but then of course you would have to actually make it public, make it clear that it's not against the people, but honestly against the car drivers. At some points we have to make that statement. So I don't know. I think I'm not Extinction Rebellion. We had long discussions and I had whole conferences participated there. I see the point. But I do think that I wouldn't just start with where I think that people are. That's maybe the only thing.
May I add a short story that Wolfgang Peckney told me? He was invited by some big company to help them reduce their CO2 emissions by reducing the flights. That was pre-corona. It was long before corona. And when he got there in this meeting room, they said, well, we're willing to reduce flights by 20%. And he told him, we will never manage. You have to reduce by 80%. Because in 20%, everybody thinks they're among the 80 who don't need to reduce their flights. But with 80%, it's quite clear that most people will have to reduce their flights. And I think that the net zero discussion in climate has made a difference. because net zero is almost zero. And then we don't need to discuss who starts first and who is second and who does more and who does less. We all have to reduce to zero. And that makes a difference in thinking. And I think in this sense, being radical is sometimes helpful. But again, there's different people. There's those people who stop smoking by reducing the number of cigarettes every week, and there's those who stop from one day to the next. Yeah. So I don't think there's one general rule for everyone.
Connecting to this question, I would like to take one question from Maria, maybe to you, Helga Kromp-Kolb. How can we get companies, the economic system, to change their focus from making profits to operating socially and ecologically sustainable? I will repeat the question. How can we get companies, the economic system, to change their focus from making profits to operating socially and ecologically sustainable?
Well, I think there's different options. I don't think that there's any silver bullet that will solve the problem. But for instance, the economy for the common goods is one such possibility, which means that, and which is the nice thing about it is, you can sort of start companies on that without their having to completely revolutionize everything. You can sort of fill in your charts for the economy of the common goods and see how you're doing. And if at some point we get governments or other organizations that they will only contract companies who fill in these forms and who show that they are acting in a sustainable manner, then these companies will start profiting more than others. So this is something which you can do without having some governmental decision or some law or something like that. So I think there's many such things. It's also the consumers themselves. I mean, we've had examples where consumers forced companies to change their business models. So consumers can do that, but they have to organize in order to do it, because otherwise it's individual acts, which I think are important as well. Yeah, I think it's a steep path, and it's not a very short one.
I'm challenging the last statement. I think there are a lot of politicians saying the consumers should do it, so they should change. It's putting it back on the individual level. Is that even feasible?
Well, we need both. I mean, I think the discussion whether it's the individuals or the politicians is useless. The individuals have to do what they can do, and therefore the main thing is they have to put pressure on the politicians in order for the politicians to develop or pass laws that make it easier to be climate friendly and more difficult and more expensive to harm the climate. So the framework within which we act should make it easier for the individual, but also for companies to be climate friendly, to be sustainable. At the moment, that's not the case. I mean, at the moment, if you, I don't know, want to go to Paris or something like that, if you try to find an airline, with a few clicks on your computer, you've got the ticket. If you try to do that by train, it takes much longer, is much more expensive, and in the end, you don't have the ticket. You only know when and how to get there. So obviously people will fly. I mean, you can't expect the majority of the people to continuously do what is more expensive, more complicated, less comfortable in many respects. That is why we need to change conditions.
I would like to add something here. I think, the individual action is always just, reduced to the you buy this or that, or you don't buy it, or stuff like that. I think you can already see kind of the individual action and companies' reaction to it. If you, for example, just watch TV, there are loads of companies who do loads and loads of greenwashing already. And this is kind of a response to individual action, to people going on the streets and people caring about the climate and the environment more. So I think those small individual actions are also seen by companies, and of course they start greenwashing because they don't have the need to do something more. But I think it's already a good first step in the right direction, because then people will probably notice that it's just greenwashing and, you know, pressure them further. But I think this is one level of, you know, individual action that is mostly unseen and, you know, should be more focused on.
Before I go on to the next question, I would like to take a look in the room. There is one question here. Yeah, please just wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Speaking of radicalization, I come often to a conclusion when I'm at events like this that we are the 1%. That means that there are 99% who are not part of this conversation, and there are a number of reasons for it. I'll try to keep this one short. But a lot of it has to do with empowerment. Empowerment is not something that we bestow on people, but something that they actually have to feel. So the question is for all of you, how do we make this more inclusive? How do we go ahead and reach the 99% who do not feel that they are part of this conversation?
To answer first.
Well, I can tell you what I do. I don't know, I'm sure it's not enough, but what I do is we have a project that is called Uninetz, which is a project that some 18 universities in Austria do together. And we have developed options over the last 3 years, what Austria could do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And in the coming 3 years, we will be going out of our universities, some 400 or so scientists, going into companies, into schools, into communities, into, I don't know, sports clubs, wherever, and discussing the one or the other option, depending on what is relevant for those people, discussing that with them and trying to involve them to make it clear that the Sustainable Development Goals are relevant for them, that it's not some United Nations thing that has nothing to do with everyday life, but to make it is relevant for them. And another thing that I do is that I write a column in one of the most read newspapers in Austria twice a week, trying to explain things in a simple manner and to get people to think about it. It's very difficult to know how effective it is, but well, some of the responses seem to indicate that they are being read. So I think there's, yeah, I mean, I'm an educator, so that's what I do. If I was an activist, I would probably do something else.
Are they mutually exclusive?
Sorry?
Are they mutually?
No, they are not. But I think to a certain extent it is necessary to take account of the system you're working in. If somebody who is recognized as a scientist is suddenly seen or is more visible as an activist than as a scientist, then there's a danger of not being recognized as a scientist anymore. Especially in the scientific community. It's sort of I mean, I do go to demonstrations with Fridays for Future. I mean, we have also, the Scientists for Futures have made it very clear that they support their claims and so on. Sort of I have to decide, at least it seems to me, I have to decide how far do I go doing what. Maybe you want to contradict.
I would like to, luckily, contradict in a sense that honestly, I've been literally scouted in London as an architect, scientist, or as I'm a writer, and activist. And it's because the students there demanded a change of curriculum, and it's even a kind of high class. It's the AA in London. Some of the architects of you know that place. It has been kind of very formal for a long time, very kind of maybe even the opposite in terms of like political statements and so on. And there was a demand by the students to say, we want a change in curriculum, we want to discuss other issues. And I hope that all scientists and all professors in all places do not distinguish and do not make you, nor me, nor anybody in this room not be activist in order to kind of be questioned as a scientist. And this would be really awful, because this is exactly what this is where universities are in there somewhere, yeah? And things are happening somewhere else, honestly. And this has been the real big problem, that I see it, it is an awful problem, and it has to change. And you're in a position to easily change it. I'm luckily slowly in a position where I can say it doesn't bother me, because I actually just got a real nice job offer and another one. And I will not hide the fact that logically I will be on the street, not only on the street myself, but I will organize the street against the right-wing government. I will organize the street against homelessness, and I will still hopefully be accepted, not only accepted, but be read as a writer and be hopefully even commissioned as an architect. Yeah? And I can see more the problem with being commissioned as an architect, yeah? Because this is maybe more with academia I would be really angry, because academia would have to understand. Yeah? The question is more like if, for instance, public institutions commission you, yeah? But even that I will not, let's say, accept, but it may happen, that's okay. But accepting, it's really the wrong thing. If we cannot split ourselves, I think, and this has been a problem throughout, that we think like we are academically this person and maybe secretly this one also, no? And not too much this one. And this is where my big role model, Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky, she was an architect and a resistance fighter against the Nazis. She was a feminist and she was a celebrated architect and so on. So I think we should all be role models that we don't need the split, but exactly the opposite, the combination.
Before you maybe reply to this, I would ask Anika Dafert to hear, I hope you can hear me, the students' perspective. Should your professors, teachers, should they be activists and professors? What's your opinion?
Hello, yes, there we go. Yeah, I definitely think everyone should be an activist and should be proud to be an activist. And if I could quickly come back to the question while I'm talking, I think I always think about it, how many people do we actually need to demand change? Do we need everyone? Do we need just a few people? Do we need a critical mass? And I think it's also kind of unfair to demand that everyone has to, engage, be in the conversation, and be an activist for that matter. I think not everyone has the resources to do this. Like you said before, I think you said it really great. And I think not everyone has the interest to do this. I think through Fridays for Future, it kind of became normal that students, even children, became political just because they had to. I didn't want to become an activist at the age of 16. I don't know, I didn't think about that my whole life. I didn't plan to do that, but I had to, and I still have to, because there's nothing happening now. I think I'd rather not be an activist and have, politicians act the way they should. So I think it's a really hard question to ask, and, try to include everyone, but not everyone has or wants to be included. In terms of exclusiveness and inclusiveness in Fridays for Future, it's again a matter of resources and, just the social surrounding and the existential surroundings of the people. So, a mother of 3 who's raising her children and has to have 2 jobs just to pay the livings, does not have to be on the streets every Friday if she doesn't have the time. So I think, trying to be as inclusive to everyone who wants and can be, but also not force everyone to be part of this when they can't.
I'd just like to add something to this discussion before. I think it makes a difference from which kind of scientific field you come. The natural sciences have a history of claiming that they are objective. They have a history of claiming that something normative is awful. It has been worked on, but it has not penetrated the scientific community.
Then the scientific community should work harder.
Yes, it should. It should. I'm trying to do that, but it's easier to do it, and I think it's more effective to do it from the inside than to do it from the outside. And I think that is one of the things where for instance, students can help by asking, what is your position? Asking their teachers,
yes, do
what
that
is your
every
position?
time. Really great idea. Ask your professors simply every time, what is your position? There's no, just wanted to say that, there's no such thing as neutrality. As I have the kind of God-given solution or a position, and that would be great. That would be a tiny bit of activism in studying. Ask constantly. Really good idea.
I'd like to stay with you, Gabu Heindl, with the next question. It is, how can we bring politicians to make decisions that are not popular in the long run, that serve climate justice? For example, taxes on vacancy, wealth tax, and so on. Wealth tax.
Honestly, I don't believe in we and the politicians so much. I think we are the politics. Yeah? And the politicians, we may exchange them. They are not our puppets, or not that we cannot make them do things. It's like us. It's us, all of us being politics. So a wealth tax. It's been interesting to me for a long time. I've been like in the first little different example. During the first Corona lockdown, a friend and me, and we, like with other scientists, we asked ourselves, okay, we could foresee how people could actually not afford their homes anymore because they got kind of short Kurzarbeit, lost their jobs and so on. And we wrote a letter, a public letter of scientists signing, I think you signed as well, who will pay for the crisis. Yeah? And we did research, not only kind of for the politicians, the laws and so on, but we also researched and tried to find every good argument to clarify one thing. If we say the real estate bubble should pay for it and not the persons who are losing their jobs, how can we make sure that not everybody, the 99%, think that we're addressing them? Yeah? But how can we make sure that they understand we are addressing the kind of, how did we argue? It was basically 80% of real estate in Austria is being owned by the upper third rich, so to say, class, yeah? And only 20%, and then only it goes even down to 5%, is being owned by those people who really maybe have an apartment and need to rent it out. The problem is the moment I say these who own kind of the 80%, and we're talking already Vonovia, Buvok, BlackRock, we don't even know the people. Yeah? It's kind of completely abstract asset funds, but still everybody thinks we're going to take their small apartment. Yeah? It's the same with wealth tax. So the issue is we have to be really better in communicating. We have to be even better, and we have to, and of course I'm really angry and now I'm talking about the politicians, I'm angry if some parties use our, let's say, incapability of making that so clear to yet again make people fear of being the losers, while we need to clearly say who will lose. And this is the biggest issue. And these losers have no names. These losers are somewhere. Yeah? These losers are, I've been discussing with the boss of Buvok, yeah? Sitting next to me, who has already bought Buvok, sind die Bundeswohnungen that were kind of publicly owned housing units, 60,000, as much as Red Vienna had built. had been privatized. This company is now proudly coming back to Vienna, is already connected with Vonovia. Vonovia is connected with BlackRock in the US. It's like enormous constellation. Comes, like, builds social housing in Vienna. I mean, this is so cynical. Huh? And we need to bring this out there. Everybody should understand that. And I was ready to say to the person next to you, we are going to expropriate BUWOG at some point. And but it doesn't even matter to say it to a person. It means that we have to understand that it's actually expropriation of and now again the question is who is we, yeah? But of the many people's possibilities, existences, the possibilities of people to live without existential fear. This is being expropriated, yeah? And we need to actually really clarify and communicate better. I don't know. It's not the politician that doesn't do things. It's the many that need to be very clear about the fact that this is what has to be done. Then we can only kind of make sure that we are voters, we are protesters, we demand, and politicians change, politics change, but the power has to come kind of from bottom up.
Does anybody want to add? Otherwise,
does anybody disagree? Everybody?
I think I'd like to add a point here, because I think that it raises the question of what politics should or should not do. So what you're saying is that politics should do what's best for people.
Politics is us.
Yes and no. I think it should be us. That I agree. But I think practically it's not, just because we don't have basic democracy where we can discuss everything. And, that's another discussion. But I think it raises the question of whether politics or politicians, let's phrase it like this, should do what people want or what is best for them. I think that's what's happened in the corona crisis. Politicians didn't always do what people wanted when they, did all the lockdowns and stuff, but what was best for everyone, which is a single case, and it's not done in climate politics right now. I think it also raises a question with, wealth tax and everything. It would be better for everyone, but it's not what people necessarily want. That's where you come back to the communication part. But I think it's also something to think about when we talk about all these things, that politics in a democracy should do what people want in order for them to live good, but not always what's best for people if that's not what they want.
I would just, in between, kindly,
Well, I
because
think
I already saw some raised hands, just for a bit shorter answer, because our time is running out.
Okay, I just want to say one thing. If everybody would talk about the unconditional rights to a certain amount of place to live, and every project, and I don't know, if that was really a kind of collective condition, politicians wouldn't be able to not take it up. And now we can say we see the same with maybe climate crisis. I don't think that it has been really infiltrated everywhere, but it slowly does. Yeah? And I think really we don't ask yourselves. I would like to ask every one of you, how many senseful, useful projects do you think you did during your studies? The ones that actually would get out there and spark and say and roll and inspire somebody else. Ask yourself, if everybody would use, it's now really utopia, all their free time and their study time and their work time and so on, to really say, okay, we are going to infiltrate the world with other ideas, with a utopia, it would be a difference. We are spending so much time with senseless things, with useless things. And maybe not even like, what do we do? I mean, now I don't want to talk like this, sorry. I'm giving up. But you know what I mean.
Don't give up.
It sounds like
the question on.
I'm throwing over to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm coming back to education, because I think that is, if you have an educated population, then politicians cannot just tell you any story and be elected. You need educated people for democracy, and I think that's really basic, because then the gap between what people want and what is good for them, I mean, that's typical for children, that they want something which is not good for them. It's not typical of grown-ups, or it shouldn't be. And that is a question of education. And it's also a question of short-termism versus medium and long-termism. And unfortunately, everything is going towards short-termism. And yeah, what's good in the short term is very often not good in the medium term and long term. And I think that is really the job of politicians, to think ahead and to tell people, I know this is difficult now, like they did in the Corona crisis. I'm not quite sure that everything was done for the well of the people in the Corona crisis, but let's not discuss this now. But what they told them, do it now, then it will be better later. That is the type of thing that you would expect of them, to really, for instance, climate change. We have the same problem you have in your thinking. If we ask for taxes, social and ecological taxes, everybody thinks they're the ones that will be hit hard. And if you use the money that comes in wisely, then it is good for the poorer section of the population will profit by it. Yeah, but you can't communicate that.
So we'll take 2 questions for now. Unfortunately, we only have a quarter of an hour left. So I saw there was one here in the second row. Is there another question? Yes, whichever way.
Thank you. It relates to an answer before. How do we build positive visions and a utopia, and how do we stop its belittlement in a way from the status quo? Because I think it's very established where we're going, and I think all alternatives are seen as very utopist. But clearly we need them. So how do we make them tangible? How do we make them realistic?
Thank you. And the second question?
Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much for the really interesting discussion. I would like to go back to the democracy question, actually, because I understand the sort of power of saying, hey, we're kids, we shouldn't be dealing with politics, or we shouldn't be activists, because it kind of heightens this idea that actually there's a crisis going on and people are doing things they're not used to, or that isn't their role, and they're taking up responsibility, unlike adults. But at the same time, I'm just curious, also this kind of what I see as a division of opinion between the two of you, because to me it also heightens this idea that there's politicians, exactly in a post-political way, that are no longer political, but rather doing what's best for everyone, and that there's like this one way of doing what's best, calculating like whatever the best outcome. And I think this is exactly the problem. I would say like the reason why we are where we are is because we have this like post-political system where we no longer take responsibility in a democracy, and we pretend that there's no political fight, that there's no classes, whatever. There's like the Eurocrats and the bureaucrats, and they can calculate things, and we ordinary people don't have to take part in politics. So my question is, like, to what extent do you think actually the Fridays for Future position that we are activists now because we have to be, but politicians should take action in a way that's anti-democratic, right? And I think that's kind of a problem, because that's why we're here in this crisis.
So, thank you very much.
Sorry.
I would kindly ask you, I know it's a bit of a tangle, but if you could find a way to answer both questions, because we only have a couple of minutes left, and keep them short. Maybe you want to start. Do you have both questions in mind? Or?
I'd like to answer the second one first. I'm sorry if this, sounded anti-democratic, because I'm not. I think it's a definition of who should be democratic and who doesn't have to be. I was more explicitly talking about children who don't really have to be democratic yet, but are now. Well, you know, it's a responsibility, and I think a 10-year-old should not have the responsibility of being really political, you know, knowing what's going on, making up their minds about what's right and what's wrong. I think there should be, you know, an age where you should be doing that, of course. I think everyone should be political. I think everyone is political. I think I said before, everyone should be an activist. But the feelings I get from when people, and especially politicians, tell me that I give them hope, it's really just frustrating, because that's not what I'm supposed to do. I kind of also feel the pressure to become a politician myself at some stage, because there's change is coming too slow. So I think I kind of didn't say it good. So yeah, I'm not anti-democratic. I'm really for, you know, involving all people in decisions. But I also think that it can be such a burden. It can be really stressful. It can be frustrating. And I think everyone, you know, has to see where their place is. And my place as a student should not have to be to work out solutions for politicians when they're already there. Because I often get asked, yeah, if there's one thing you could change, if you could change it right now in Austrian politics, what would it be? And I have to say, I have no clue, but there's someone who has a clue. There we have Austrian scientists who are literally telling politicians what to do. They made a whole plan for it. So I think everyone should be an activist, everyone should be political, everyone has to be political in a democracy, but in their own ways, and, you know, take up responsibility, but only their own. And I feel like that's not divided that great right now, because I don't feel like politicians are owning up to their responsibility. And I feel like youth has to make up for that right now, and that's more of my point.
Would one of you like to answer the first question regarding a more positive vision?
The question was, how can we believe in utopias again, or how can we make them not be belittled, or what? How can we avoid their belittlement? This is something that I'm really working on since some years. We've done a study for the Chamber of Labor, like commissioned by the Chamber of Labor. It's not published yet. It's in the making, in the finishing. It's called "Gerechte Stadt muss sein." The title itself is already bold. Yeah? Gerechte Stadt muss sein. But we couldn't say towards a just city. Yeah? But Gerechte Stadt muss sein is a little bit bold enough to be kind of clear that it's not the path of solutions to the justice city. Yeah? And I think this is where utopias have a problem. If they become kind of the recipe. And if they're not the recipe, but rather kind of a vision, and believe me, I've had problems. You may think that I am a radical thinker, but I do go along with Mark Fisher, who said, like, it's very difficult to think another world outside of capitalism. Yeah, we rather think that the world could come to an end. This is what we can believe more easily, that the world will come to an end, than to, for instance, imagine an end of capitalism. Yeah? We can imagine so much less kind of a real utopia than we can a dystopia. And we can imagine so much less kind of, we cannot think so far. We would like to, but I've really, let's think about it. Do this exercise. Ask yourselves the furthest you can think a utopia. But the way we worked there was like we tried to, also not only us, but together with lots of people and so on, to imagine as far as possible. But then what we called backtracing, that you kind of look back and see what could be feasible steps, and this is now again far medium, small. What could be steps that would go more or less in this direction, that they're at least not going the other way? Yeah? And I think that's what makes them feasible. But on the other hand, honestly, I think that a lot of things are utopias today, which was already existing. If we talk about a real good welfare state, yeah, it sounds like utopia. Everybody being kind of well taken care of, no two-class medicine, and. Think about it. Maybe I'm like now being, maybe I'm, our generation is thinking of a better past than there was. But let's say there's ideas, there's utopias. The Red Vienna, I sometimes really bring that about. In Red Vienna, you would have to, like as a worker, you'd pay 4 to 8% of your salary for your house. This is a number that is so utopian, so far beyond any of your numbers, I'm sure. If it's good or bad and so on, but the great thing is it's thinkable. And I think I never belittle any utopia which makes me think an alternative. And if we make that very clear, it's not a recipe, but it is at least a help to us to think an alternative in a world where, you said it, or you said it, I think, where Margaret Thatcher and many other people have told us for years that there is no alternatives. Utopias are alternatives, and that's by itself not to be belittled. And but to make clear that something is far and something is closer, I think this makes us become very serious, or like also very. I don't feel like that I'm doubted when it comes to. I also have really super pragmatic steps that could be done tomorrow.
I have to stop you now. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. I would ask you for a final statement, please, Helga Kromp-Kolb.
Well, I think one of the things that also helps against disillusionment is talking to other people who share the same ideals, share the same visions, and develop them together. I think that's what keeps us going. And that's probably what will make the difference. So glad you're here, and stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Going back to where I started at the very beginning of this afternoon, there should be so many more panels with way more women or only women or all non-binary genders. It was really great discussion, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Sorry to those whose questions couldn't be answered. I hope some of you will stay because I have a couple of announcements to make. There is, again, an online matching where you can network with others for those who are not here today. For those who want to catch up and talk here, there is a buffet and I think some wine. At least there was wine last year on the 3rd floor. Viennese wine, nice. And one more announcement. There is a GBS Passathon bike tour on the 31st of July across the city to Seestadt, and you can register over there in the corner if you want to join. It's open to everyone, so not only to the GBS students. Yes, that's it for now. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the great discussion, and have a nice evening.